Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. This was actually in another venue, and there was some changes in both venues and times at short notice. So anyway, fortunately, we have 1 hour time. It was earlier only half an hour. And when you invite someone like Professor Sundar Sarukkai, as Sheldon Pollock said, as one of India's leading thinker in philosophy and a great orator, and particularly when discussing about a seminal work like The Cracked Mirror, which was published 10 years ago and still very much topical in research and discussions. So obviously we need more time. So I don't want to, or I don't have to introduce Sundar, so whom I know since 2005. And it's, on a personal note, it's such 2 decades of friendship, conversation, dialogues. It started in Bangalore, then later in Delhi, and in various venues and times. So I'm so happy that you are here, Sundar, with us, and that too to discuss on your work, The Cracked Mirror, a magnum opus that you and Gopal Guru has produced and has been the object of discussion ever since. And first of all, you are the speaker and you are expected to speak most of the part. This book, I'll show you. This is the one published from Oxford India paperback, wonderful. And I would recommend all of you to buy and read this book. So written by Sundar, who is from philosophy and philosophy of science, and Gopal Guru, a political scientist who was our professor in JNU and who retired. So, sorry. Yeah, let me start with this. It has a structure of dialogue between Gopal and you. And of course, Gopal writing the first chapter, introducing the problem to some extent, and you are responding to it. So the first chapter is the egalitarian principle and the social science practice, where he asked this most fundamental, most seminal question, the right to think and express. So it's not that the science and philosophy ensures an egalitarian platform, neutral, objective and all that. And finally, even the right to think also, that comes later, the right to think and express, and the classification, hierarchization of epistemology. And basically it's all about the domain of senses and the domain of conceptual cognition. So both of you, Sundar and Gopal, very revolutionary, trying to reverse, or I would say revise and reverse, a long tradition of hierarchy in epistemology, and particularly in the modern European epistemology since Descartes, where the sensory experience was subordinated to the conceptual cognition, despite resistance by Robert Hooke from philosophy of science, or Alexander Gottlieb Baumgarten from the aesthetics and all. So first, I would like to start our discussion by asking you the kind of motivation and its social context and political relevance of such a reversal.
Yeah. Thank you, Babu. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. And I'm really delighted that we are discussing The Cracked Mirror again. My co-author in this is Professor Gopal Guru, and although he's not here in person, he's there in spirit. I spoke to him just half an hour back. The book started actually from a very provocative piece written by Professor Gopal Guru. He wrote an article he gave a memorial lecture in Delhi, and he raised a very simple question. He said, why is it in Indian social science, the upper caste, the people who are more privileged, why are they writing about the people who are marginalized? In other words, you are saying, within social science, when people write about the experiences of other communities, who has the right to write about it? This is such an important question, And it has come to us in various ways. For example, if I am not a Muslim, can I write about a Muslim character? If I am not a Hindu, woman, can I write about a woman character? What does it actually mean? But Gopal was asking a political question. He was saying, why is it that the knowledge produced by other communities are being produced by people who come from very dominant backgrounds? That's the fundamental question. So that's why is Indian social science inegalitarian? Why is there no equality in it? Now people, and he coined a very important phrase. The phrase he coined was empirical Shudras and theoretical Brahmins. What he was trying to suggest is that the act of theorizing, what is it to do theory? That question of the mind as against the senses, that distinction was made by saying, look, all of us as people, ordinary people, quote unquote ordinary people, are people who have experiences with our body. But you need somebody who can do theory. And what does theory mean? What does it mean to theorize? For example, when people wrote about the Indian caste system, some of the most influential writers were Germans and French, like Weber or Dumont and others. So the question was, should one have an experience before one talks about it? It's a very large question. It's a question which comes repeatedly all the time. Today morning I was having a discussion on my novel, following a prayer, and the question which my conversationist asked was exactly this. That novel is about children, young girls who think about prayers, etc. And she said, how did you write about these girls? Do you have an experience to be able to write about them? So this question is always something we ask. It's become such a big problem in almost everything we do in Indian society today. Whether you are a fiction writer, whether you are an academic, in the social sciences, people ask this question, why are you writing about somebody else? Now one quick answer to that is to say, don't write about anybody else. Just write about yourself. Write about your experience, your life, etc. And therefore you cannot write about anybody else. But the problem of theory was that theory is a particular kind of skill. And only some people were trained in it for various historical reasons. So it ended up that the dominant community within societies were writing about other communities. So basically this reversal, so the subject is the one who experiences it. So the Dalit subject is the one who is experiencing. The dominant subject, the social scientist, comes and tells you what they are experiencing. And this was seen as what Gopal and me really formulate. This is a fundamentally ethical problem with the act of theory. Because it is raising a larger question. What is it, when we ask theory, theory sounds like a big word. It seems very complicated to do it. But what exactly is it whenever you talk about, let us say, a social phenomena, you are theorizing. Suppose I go back and say, Calicut is such a literary city. There are so many people who are reading books. I'm actually doing the first part of theorizing. That is, I'm taking from my experience and extrapolating it. I'm broadening it. I'm universalizing it. I'm making comment about people in Kozhikode. Because I'm saying, people in Kozhikode are so interesting. They are so interested in literature, etc. I am doing theory. The question we are really asking, we started asking in this book is, what does it mean to study Indian society? That's all. At a very fundamental question, that is what it is. And as you said, the history of theory has privileged the mind over the experiencing body. Everything is about the mind. Look at our education system. We sit in classes. When I created a new program, in a postgraduate program, I wanted students to do physical work, because what does it mean to learn without, children now sit in classroom like that all the time. They just read books or write. There is no use of the body in our learning. And that is the empirical Shudras. All of education has been completely dominated by the mind. So the question we are asking here is, what does it actually mean to write about Indian society? Tomorrow, forget about us, people who are writing all this stuff. Tomorrow, if you are commenting upon somebody, if you say Malayalis are like this, or Tamilians are like that, or Indian secularism is like this. Whatever you talk about, you are theorizing. And you have to ask the question, how can I theorize? What does it mean to theorize? That's really the fundamental question we're asking.
That's so interesting that you mentioned this, the physical and bodily aspect of classroom, which unfortunately we don't have, but which was the protoform of any academia. Like it was known as gymnasium, and still it is the +2 in Germany is gymnasium, whereas we understand gymnasium in a different way, only for a physical training. So that was the original idea, I mean, by the Greeks and by Plato and all. And these references, and of course, which I could not, this social reference which I could not give, which you have done brilliantly. But about the theoretical philosophical side, one most important observation or a kind of leitmotif of the work is the ownership and the authorship of experience and the thoughts. You know? This is very interesting, the ownership. But I would say the advent of modern epistemology, of course, later I would give some reference how that was a kind of transition from the medieval scholastic philosophy into the modern philosophy with a lot of reversals and changes. But what happened with Descartes was he actually disowned the sensation by the method of negation. So the Cartesian epistemology was founded on negating all the secondary qualia in the object and the world as usual, but not that he negates the subjective part. That's very clear. So the attempt is to create a pure entity, res cogitans, as I think, therefore I am. And these are all the extremely reduced or irreducible final axiomatic principles which he has created. But I would observe that this is a historical process. I would say there's a historical process of cleaning the subject from Descartes to Kant, clearly. Yeah? And they were all obsessed with purity. Yeah? So especially with Kant, finally he said the critique of pure reason. The pure reason. And reason which is not contaminated by the senses in some way. But he was a philosopher of synthesis. He said, no, a concept needs intuition. But later in the Neo-Kantian school, the Hermann Cohen said, no, we have to eliminate even that impurity. So he created pure logic, completely devoid of any impurity. So the conceptual cognition as pure abstraction is always considered to be pure against the sensory content. But unfortunately, we are connected with the world only through our senses. These are this is being reflected in the philosophy ever since Plato and Aristotle, in the medieval universal conflict. For example, with my naked eye, I see a particular object, but I think a universal. So there is a kind of aporia, a kind of diverging of references in that. Anyway, I'm not going into those complicated terms and all. My interest is in your work, though has this, it's a work on ethics also, basically, but with a clear theoretical foundation, which I really like. Yeah? So, especially with Gopal Guru and you, for example, this famous Gopal Guru's, I would say, revision of Descartes after 400 years, I heard it. I was in JNU and I witnessed it. He just said, oh, I think therefore I am, which is Descartes. No, actually I think therefore you are. I think therefore you are. Or we think therefore we are. Now the question is, for Descartes it is clearly theoretical, but when it moves from theory to practice, from theory to ethics, we cannot assume a pure subject, uncontaminated, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So that is exactly that. Later when we discuss the ethics of theorizing, in the actual practice, this is not possible, and maybe the experience should enhance the conceptual cognition.
Yeah, okay, just to phrase what you are saying in terms of the specific question in this book. So after Gopal wrote this, he was criticizing Indian social scientists for writing about communities in which they did not belong. And when he was criticizing it, the Indian social scientists didn't respond. They did not come out and say, Are they doing the right thing or not? Should they be doing that or not? Because it was raising a very difficult question. Are you saying, so people are asking Gopal to say, was he saying that if you are not a Dalit, you cannot write about Dalits? If you are not a Muslim, you cannot write about Muslims. Or if you are not a Hindu, you cannot write, etc., etc. You can. So in other words, this seemed to be working towards a kind of identity, including about gender identity, caste identity, class identity, and so on. This was a very difficult question because obviously people have been writing about others. Writing is been writing about others. And today, this whole question of experience has become a very important category. Experience is so, we think experience is something special to us. So one of the things which, in our revision of the whole thing, it's a very simple question I ask. And you are right if you tell me that, for example, in northern Karnataka, everybody eats chilli bhaji. Even if you read regular, chilli, green chilli is very spicy, and they make a bhaji with it. It's part of their food. It's part of this Dharwad food, If you eat chilli bhajis, you have a particular experience. You will start sweating, your whole body feels like it's on fire, etc. Now, can you, suppose you have not tasted it at all, can you write about it? And you're writing a novel. Your character is eating a chilli bhaji. Should you have experience before you write about that person? So this was the question. It's a difficult question. What is an experience? So we are actually asking a very simple question in this book. What is it to experience? And is your experience yours? Do you have a copyright over your experience? Okay, that's the fundamental question. And we went back to thinking about it. So for example, ask ourselves this point, right? So one is to experience something. That's a first step. That is, I eat the bhaji, I have a particular experience. The act of theorizing is an act of talking about it. Talking about it in language. So I'm expressing it. I say, oh, it was so hot, I was sweating, etc. I'm using language to convert my experience and presenting it to you. Now, the first argument, why experience is not yours. Okay, so this is the sad but true statement. Each of us believe that your experience is yours alone and others cannot access it. And that was the question of Gopal, right? So one of the ways we built upon it is the first question to recognize is, experience is common. The moment I write about it, okay, what have I done? The moment I write about it, I'm using a language to write about it. The moment I use language, language is not mine. I do not own the language I use. It has been produced by all of you. Each one of you has added to that language. When I use that term to talk about my experience, I'm actually talking about a shared experience because language is shared experience. But having said that, can I write about, some tribal woman's experience? Can I understand it? That's a question. Can I understand a tribal woman's experience? And the answer to that, that is, I think, one of our core things which we develop in this, is to say, and that's part of what I really, have come to believe, which is to say that all our experiences, there is something common. So, suppose there's an oppressor and somebody who's oppressed, right? The oppressor can write about the oppressed because there's some shared experience. But there is always one bit of experience that is special to you, which I cannot experience. We call that the lived experience. But then everybody uses lived experience very easily. So we wanted to categorize it properly, define it properly. So the definition of lived experience which we offer, and that's where the ethics really comes in. The definition of a lived experience is this. I'll give you an example which I discuss in the novel. In this book. In Bangalore, about 20, 30 years ago, there was a new trend of restaurants which started. And one of the famous restaurants was called Halli Mane, which means village home, if you like. It's basically they were giving village food in Bangalore. So Bangalore is a very smart IT city, they think. And in Bangalore, they wanted to give food which villagers eat. Okay, it's very odd. Because you go to that restaurant, you're paying a lot of money to eat what poor people eat. So, for example, in Karnataka, they eat ragi balls. They cooked ragi and they are ragi balls. It's called ragi mudde. So, you go to this restaurant, you can get ragi mudde. So, you can participate in the experience of the poor. You can participate in the experience of the rural. That is the aim. Today in Bangalore, I can tell you, in these fancy malls, they have village dabas, like Rajasthan daba, very expensive to go there, and they'll make you sit on the ground, and they have a bullock cart. Somebody will come pushing a cart, people dressed like they are in villages and so on. What they have done is, they have commodified experience. They're selling you experience. You can buy experience. But is that really the experience of the rural person? There is one definition. How can you then say that if I eat the ragi mudde, I'm not experiencing what a villager in Karnataka is eating? There's a difference. And the difference is this. When I go to Halli Mane and order ragi mudde, and I get ragi mudde, I take a bite, I don't like it. I then will order tandoori, paneer, butter masala, etc. A person in rural India who is eating, in Karnataka who is eating ragi mudde, has no choice but to eat the ragi mudde. The question of choice of experience is really the fundamental definition of what is special to your experience. Because I can share, I can act like one Malayali today. I can wear one of your mundu and wear dress, I can eat all your stuff which you're eating, maybe pick up a few words here and there, and act like I've had the experience of being a Keralite today. But that's not true, because I can always get out of it whenever I don't like it. Whereas a lived experience is one in which you have no choice but to live in it, to suffer it, to enjoy it, whatever. So this was an important context of untouchability. For example, people in social sciences, they'll go study communities, they'll go live with them, study them, etc. Right? And people will say, well, we were also like them. 2 years I lived with them, I ate with them, I dressed like them, etc. But what is the difference between them and this researcher who has gone there? The difference is the researcher after 1 year goes back to her university and writes a thesis or whatever. These people stay back where they are. That idea that there is, so when you ask what is special to your experience as a woman, as a man, as a trans, as whatever, whether it's in gender, caste or class, what is special to your experience, you have to ask, what is that experience which I cannot get out of, which I am not able to get out of? That experience is special to you, and only you can write about it. So while not being a woman, I may be able to write something about women, let us say, if I want to. Although I think Gopal's question is always a question which is reminding us to ask, why do you want to write about this? Why are you choosing your character of those kind of characters? Why do you want to go study the tribals? I always tell, whenever I start my research methodology course to my students who go out to the field, I tell them, don't take for granted you're going and studying on rural area. Typically they'll come and study various communities. I tell them, well, you always go and study communities who are lower than you. I would love to do field work with Shah Rukh Khan's house. I want him to invite me to his house. I want to stay in his house, dress like him, eat like him for 2 years, and then write a thesis. They won't even let me inside that road, forget his house. Whereas, what we do as students? We enter villages, we enter people's house, we stay with them. It raises this is the larger ethical question of producing knowledge. Why am I doing it? I am going and studying you because I want to produce a knowledge about you. What is this knowledge? Why am I producing knowledge about you? Who can produce knowledge about whom? Right? That question has to be asked in our social sciences, or in even in journalism, which is writing about other people. That is really where the genesis of this problem was.
Yeah, I mean, those references on which I want to discuss, you already mentioned, which is one of the central point, which is lived experience, which has a very strong philosophical source, which is phenomenology, which you will discuss later in the phenomenology of untouchability. And this brings us to, again, back to Gopal Guru, who wrote a kind of very important chapter, which is experience, space, and justice. So there he discussed the experience and ethics of theory, experience as initial condition of its theorizing, epistemology of experience, etc. So there are very interesting quotes. And first he quotes from Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and Ambedkar. And then he asks a series of questions. So I'll just read out those quotes, and probably you can continue that. So the chapter is entitled, it's the fourth chapter, Experience, Space, and Justice by Gopal Guru. And it starts with two quotes. First by Nehru, wherever Gandhi is, it is the capital in India. Wherever Gandhi is, it is the capital in India. And Baba Sahib Ambedkar answers to or responds to it, Gandhiji, I do not have homeland. So this is a very strong and contrasting answer. First he says, Nehru, wherever Gandhi is, it is the capital of India, in India. And Ambedkar says, Gandhiji, I do not have homeland. So the question of space and justice comes here in a very prominent and very profound way. And then he continues in this chapter with how the experience lay the foundation of theorizing or cognition. And he's asking a series of questions. I'll just, one second. So, I read out from the book. Let us address the question of incommensurability between experience and theory by putting forward the following set of questions. First, what has been the epistemic status of experience as an analytical category? Which is to say, does experience provide epistemic conditions for producing knowledge and understanding? What decides the order of the intelligibility of experience? Do we require concepts beforehand to render the experience intelligible, etc.? Then second, does mere availability of experience at the concrete or particular level provide a sufficient condition for experience to acquire intelligibility at the universal level? So these are the very fundamental questions that he is asking and explaining, and you are responding to that.
Yeah. I think this is a very important set of questions. Thank you, Babu, for alerting us to it. Because, it is actually asking a very simple question. And I hope whatever you take from the book or not, at least this question will remain in your mind. And let me phrase this question. It's a very, very simple question, which is, can you, when you experience, and let's say you can experience through your five senses, right? When I eat, let's say I eat an apple and it is sweet, I have experienced the sweetness of the apple. Nobody is going to dispute it. All of us have experienced the taste of the apple. The question, which is I think something for us to think about, is this. Is my experience independent of my mind? Which is the word of concepts, okay? In other words, suppose you did not know the concept sweet. When I eat apple, will I say, oh, the apple is sweet? If I don't have a concept called sweet, I can't say apple is sweet. But it's not that you are not experiencing. You are experiencing something, right? Your tongue is feeling something. But you don't have the word for it. Okay, this is such an important question because this is why all of us are theoreticians. We theorize because the moment you use language to describe your experience, it's only your experience, okay? You use your language to describe it. What concepts you use to describe influences what that experience really is. Suppose, for example, I'm sitting in a classroom, like my students sometimes do, and they might sit in a class and say, oh, I'm bored. If they use the concept bored, what they're doing is they are categorizing that experience in a particular manner. They're saying, my experience is a one of boredom. But suppose another student says, I'm not interested. That's the same experience. It's a very different way of understanding it. everything that you, so one of the most important things about activism, okay, and this is something which is related to this larger question, activism comes from what? One of the most important forms of activism is to learn to produce the correct term, the correct language for a particular experience. You know, for example, in labor, you know, when people were working in factories, you did not have something called labor laws, right of a laborer. That is, a factory worker also has rights. What is the right? That I will not work for more than 8 hours. Now, if you look at feudal systems of labor, they would continue. They can call you at 12 o'clock in the night and say, come and do something. And people went and did it because they thought that is what being a laborer meant. But the moment you use a term like right, that immediately changed the way they saw their experience. For example, another very famous example, much discussed, is the idea of domestic violence. Okay, so suppose there is a case of domestic violence, that is between a man and a woman, and a little bit of violence happens. When you look at records, when women have talked about it earlier, they would say, well, I thought being married was to get kicked around a little bit. But the moment you introduce a term like domestic violence, which says, no, that is not permissible within a marriage, for example, then it gives you a different category to understand the same experience. In other words, we may have an experience, but each conceptual way we define it changes what it is. And that raises a very important question, I think, for us to see what kind of concept should I use to talk about the world. So the moment where, for example, Gopal's earlier work on humiliation, when the question of when the Dalits' experience was reclassified, not in terms of oppression, but in terms of humiliation, the same experience had a different meaning. Right? So this question is what we have to ask. You have your experience, I agree. All of us have our experiences and nobody can do anything about it. But the way, the language you use to describe it produces different types of experiences. So what is the correct language to use? What is the correct way to understand the experiences of your society? Who can best understand it? For example, just to bring it down to the real world, should you write about Kerala experiences here in Malayalam? Or when I write it in English with conceptual world of my English discourse, am I talking about something else? Is it that when you use a Malayalam word for something, it has a very different meaning than a very loose translation in English? So when I go back and write about my visit to Kozhikode and write about, oh, this was like this, etc., would it be very different than if Babu wrote it in Malayalam? It's the same experience. We are sitting here, we are talking about what happened. It is not possible because that is the function of language. And this constant, so the question about theory is actually a question about language. How do I convert my experience into language? What is your skills of language you need to be able to express your experience? What is happening to you? If you're not able to express it and capture what is happening to you, right, then you remain silent of your experiences. How do you communicate your experience? So today in identity terminologies, if everything is defined based on your identity, I am your gender, class or caste, then that becomes a way to distinguish. That becomes a way to understand your experiences. So how will we deal with this larger question? Yeah.
Anyway, that's in fact these references that labor and how they are empowered by the conceptual understanding, it really suit to Kerala because the high literacy and the Marxist movement and others, and it's the first time all trade unions culture,
yeah, trade union.
and with all its positive and negative aspects. But you're absolutely right, as only when it is conceptualized, that then the experience becomes a different experience.
Yeah,
that is very clear.
Yeah.
And also the rest of the, then we come to a very
I'll just give you a quick example. It's a very funny one, which one of my Malayali friends was telling me. You know, when we went out, I think, to have some drink somewhere or whatever, you know, there are these side dishes, right, to eat. You order along with maybe a beer or something. And he said, we call it touchings. Okay, and actually in Tamil there is a word. We use a very similar word, which is thodardu, you know. He said, so he was calling those dishes, the side dishes, along with whatever he was drinking, he called it touchings. I thought it was such a beautiful word. And you know, imagine writing about touchings. I went and ordered touchings. You know, it's such a simple one, and it's so unique in this sense to the Malayalam language. And there is, you know, what I'm trying to say is, I think a larger lesson we learn from this crack mirror is this, that if you use your language terms, you can produce very effective theory. We need to produce theory. We cannot accept the categories which other people have produced for us. And for you to produce theory, it's not very difficult. Go back to your language. You know, with this idea of touchings, you can do so much around it. Just as an idea, I'm just saying. Okay? So that is why this question of language and theory are so closely linked.
Well, I can more particularize this touchings. Actually, this is used, I think, in Kottayam, where they have kind of very active drinking culture. So the touchings are the glass of whiskey and all the
I thought
touchings
Kerala
around
has active drinking culture.
No,
I thought the whole of Kerala had active.
Well, some districts have special cultures.
Okay.
Anyway, so that's how it comes, and you're absolutely right. And also this. Okay, we come to a very important part of your work. You know that which is the ethics of theorizing, which I consider is the core of the work. And also, it extends to the beginning and to the end, you know, finally. So the right and authorship of not just thinking, but experience also.
Yeah.
And, well, I don't want to ask anything, but would you please explain this?
Yeah. Okay. So this is, I think, a central problem in what we call as a modern knowledge systems, modern sciences. You can ask the question, why is a question of morality? What I mean by morality, what is right and wrong, why is it not applicable to knowledge? If those of you who saw the movie Oppenheimer, which is recently there, right? There was a question which scientists had to deal with when they produce a nuclear bomb. So when they built, so it's not just an idea of Einstein E equal to mc squared. You needed an army of people, like you can see in the movie, to produce the bomb. You need design, you need engineering, you need management, you need a lot of money to do it. You build the bomb. Why did they build the bomb? Because they wanted to, as a deterrent, they wanted to frighten the others, don't continue the war. And they build the bomb and then they go and drop it. They drop it not once but twice, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They saw the impact of the first bomb and still went ahead and dropped it. They went and dropped it in Japan and not in Europe, which is where the primary war was. Right? So the question was raised repeatedly, it keeps coming back in that film too. Don't scientists feel a moral burden when they produce this kind of knowledge? You know, Einstein is a very, obviously an intelligent chap, was an intelligent person. But when he came up with that thing of E equal to mc squared, could he not anticipate the consequences of it? He knew the consequences. Why is it that when we produce knowledge of something, we do not attach the question of morality to it? There is a history to it. There's a very long history to it. In Western societies, which lead up to our idea of modern academics, what happens is, till the 16th century, till the production of modern science, all knowledge was attached to the morality, was attached to some notion of morality. So, for example, you could not distinguish the knower and the known. That is, known is what knowledge I tell you. The knower is the person who is telling you. So suppose I am telling you some piece of knowledge, as against Hitler telling you something, there has to be some reason, there has to be some difference. And that was always part of pre-modern societies. I'll give you an example. One of the most horrendous chap in the history of humankind is Dr. Mengele. Dr. Mengele was a Nazi doctor who experimented on women and children, particularly on twin children, etc. And he produced knowledge about the human body. But he did things which no doctor should do or will do. Now, the question is, the knowledge he produced by his evil deeds, should you accept it as knowledge? Should it be there in your medical textbooks? Let's assume, he did find something new. Can you, in other words, the question is, can you remove the knower, the morality of the knower, what kind of a person I am, from the knowledge that I produce? This is the fundamental question. Okay, and that is at the origin of the creation of what we call as modern knowledge systems. When modern science begins not because people are doing experiments or did theory. It begins by removing this question of morality on scientific knowledge. I mean, today you might even say, is nuclear bomb good or bad? Look at the number of experiments people are doing on bugs, these biological organisms. Every government has secret labs in which they produce some of the most toxic biological organisms. If one of them escapes out, it has tremendous consequences. The question is, why should these people be producing these kinds of things? Why do you want to produce not just one nuclear bomb, but you have built thousands of bombs around the world today? So the reason why this happened was this removal of ethical questions on scientific knowledge. For example, we might even say, bomb is good or bad, but have you ever asked this question, whether 2 plus 2 equal to 4, is it good or bad? You don't think 2 plus 2 equal to 4 is good or bad. It's beyond moral judgment. That belief that scientific fact and scientific knowledge is beyond moral judgment is the fundamental cause by which ethics was removed out of theory. Because theory in social science is in some sense modeled after theory in the natural sciences. So I can theorize about the society just like the scientist theorizes about nature. So look at the problem of morality here. Suppose I want to know something about the tree. Tree is in nature. I want to produce knowledge about the tree. I want to know at what force do I hit the tree so that it breaks. Or I can ask what temperature fire should I light the tree so it will burn. Okay. I can do that. And I can write in my textbook, okay, so much of fire you burn, the tree will burn. Now imagine if that is the scientific method and I want to study people or I want to study society, can I say how much force should I hit Babu before he loses his cool? Can I say how much temperature should I set fire to him before he starts jumping around? You cannot, because social sciences is fundamentally different. The production of knowledge needs ethical concerns. You have to begin with ethical questions before you produce knowledge. So when I write about a community, when I write about what is happening in Indian society, I'm not writing just about facts. I'm not an objective observer of society, like I'm an objective observer of nature. When I talk about you, I am related to you, I'm part of you. I cannot do things to you that I can do to nature. By the way, many traditions, many Asian and African traditions would not do experiments on nature because they thought nature was part of them. So that is why the idea of nature itself is something very different. So how do I understand? So in other words, I'm asking a more political question today. If today we write something about the nature of people, what people are, how people of different religious communities are, etc., do we have a right to write it? Do we have, what kind of authority do I have to write it? The only authority is if I begin with a moral position. Morality is something which we normally don't like because it reminds you of moral science class in schools. This is good, this is bad, etc. But without the question of morality behind your production of knowledge, it is impossible to produce social science. Any social science knowledge which is produced by other people, about other people and communities, without this intrinsic, inherent moral question is illegitimate. It has to be illegitimate. In the sense, to extend this question of Gopal, If people who do not have let's say you have the oppressor writing about the oppressed, if the dominant castes are writing about Dalits, for example, in an oppressor-oppressor relation, it is immoral to do it. It's not just right or wrong, it's immoral. Because that moral question has to be asked whenever you produce some claim about knowledge.
Yeah, and in fact, this aspect, you also gave, like, of course, the discussion is very dialectical. I mean, also there are counter arguments. And one of that is a scientific discovery can have both effects. Can be used for good purpose and bad purpose. And beginning with a knife. A knife is used for cutting vegetables or meat or anything in the kitchen, and it is used for killing others. And most explicitly, the nuclear energy. So we use it all over the world for creating power, but also for bombs and all. But to this Mengele example, because I come from Germanistic, the German history, I teach. There's a very interesting but uncertain, not popular, which was actually published during this mind-body debate, which was very prominent in Germany, pursued by even the directors of Max Planck Institute, where mind is nothing but brain. Yeah? So the whole social scientists, theologians, philosophers, all from humanities started questioning this without having clear arguments. Yeah? So my point is, people may not have clear argument, but they suspect certain things. This suspicion refers to intention. What is actually the intention behind this? One example I can give you, I have to disclose this because it's already published also. The Kaiser Wilhelm Society, the Kaiser Wilhelm Gesellschaft, was the earlier form of Max Planck. It was till the end of Second World War, it was Kaiser Wilhelm Gesellschaft, which became Max Planck Institute later. So the last director of Kaiser Wilhelm Gesellschaft became the first director of Max Planck Institute, who was at that time a famous neurobiologist. After he became the director of Max Planck, after the Nuremberg process, where Nazis were convicted, first he demanded that to give the brain sample of those executed Nazis. For what? He wanted to do experiments, maybe to prove that it is not the subject, but the brain caused the whole atrocities. This was referred later and again by the people from humanities, show that there is an intention behind it, to free the subject and accuse the body or the brain and all. So I think to add to your observation, these intentions, like Nietzsche say, don't just read philosophy, think of the intention of philosophers, why they are philosophers and like that.
Yeah. And I think more than philosophy, I think in a larger sense, I think for Gopal and me, it was a question of how do you talk about our society today? That's really the fundamental origin. Who should be talking about our society? Why is it that even today, if you talk about India studies, it's being done abroad. You have PhD students coming from the US and Germany writing about all practices in India. If I want to teach something which is happening in, let's say the Yakshagana in Karnataka, the people whom we give as reading are from these people who have come and studied it. So this is raising a very important question for all of us. It's not just about academics. I'm saying it's about media. It's about how we understand ourselves, how a politics happens within a country, whether it's the politics of Ayodhya or whatever else it is. How is it we are all producing those things, right? And how do we understand that? What is our contribution to understanding ourselves? That's the fundamental question, nothing more than that. What is our contribution to understanding ourselves? And what is the morale, what is the basic moral position from which we can function as members of a society? In this sense, that's why the end of it, the whole untouchability question, whatever people are saying today, people talk about so much about reservation, anti, pro, etc. But just ask ourselves this simple question, right? How can any society justify untouchability? How can, think of whatever kind of reasons you want. What does it mean to allow the practice of untouchability within societies? What does it even mean? What does it mean for us to belong to societies that allows that? I think That is a moral question. Forget about going and doing empirical field work, doing all that is fine. But there is a fundamental moral prerogative, an imperative on all of us to ask yourself before we produce knowledge about anything, what is my moral stand? Where am I speaking from? And that perhaps is really and of course this book is slightly dated because after this Gopal and me wrote another book called Experience, Caste and the Everyday Social, which was published in 2019, and where we extend some of these arguments and so on. But I think in the context of social sciences, of course, this has been still an important debate.
Yeah, which I can very well confirm that after it is published in 2012, there are lots of research going on, particularly in JNU, and even after Gopal retired from there, and also this choice and necessity of experience and all. Anyway, we have covered most of the points, and 10 minutes is left for us for discussion. Yeah.
Hello, good afternoon, Professor. I get that, I have read the book twice, but I am just 22, so maybe I am not fully able to understand it. So my question is that, when this thing happens, that fine, there has been some shift post this book has been written, that people have started writing about their experiences, and obviously they were writing before it as well. So they have written about their experiences, but they, for example, if lower caste person or lower caste person has written about their experiences, they will get labeled as Dalit academic, right? So at the end, what language, we should use, you were talking about it, right? So at the end, aren't we in the inherent loop of, depending or surviving on the benevolence or the language or morality of the oppressor? Like, what's the way out of it then?
Okay, no, it's a very difficult question. I mean, if I understood you right, you're saying people are now writing more about their experiences. That's fine. And that's a point which we also discussed earlier in terms of Dalit autobiographies and so on. Okay, so people are writing about the experience, but they're still using the language, which is the dominant language, right? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that they do still get up. Like, for example, if a Brahmin, M.N. Srinivasan or anyone used to write about lower caste community, they used to be just called as sociologists.
Yeah.
But now the case becomes a Dalit sociologist if they start writing about their experiences.
Yeah.
So isn't it the language, again, so that's the
Absolutely. No, you're right. I think one of the important points which I think this exercise has taught us is the correct use of language itself is ethical in character. And we know that, for example, we can't use certain words to a student. In a classroom, even if I'm irritated at a student, I won't call them, hey, you're stupid or something, right? We have certain constraints on the language we use. But when we do theory, we think, theory is about truth and true or whatever that vague meaning of it is. And therefore, I can use whatever kind of language I want in order to express it. In fact, I think a lot of social theory is just a performance of how much language you can use. It's really not about clarity. It's not about an ethical point at all. So I think the challenge here is, can you discover not just a new experience? I think a new experience needs a new language. How do you empower the people with new experience to produce that new language? Where is that language going to come from? I mean, there is a politics of language, including just the English and, let's say, Malayalam. Since our dominant social theory has been so much in English, I've seen many people, even from Kerala, struggle with this question, to have the confidence to write theoretically in English, because they feel that language is not theirs, right? So I think this is a very important question of making us think about language. And that's why I was mentioning in the morning my session on the novel. I wrote a novel called Following a Prayer because it's on language. I realized the language of philosophy is not going to help me do that, to deal with that question. What is language? How do children understand it? It's a story. It's not a philosophy book. But to me, that was the only medium by which I could think about language. And I think there is a great need to produce new language, new vocabulary. I'm not saying we have to produce all words, produce new vocabulary, like this word touching, and produce a whole vocabulary around it. That's what the Germans did, that's what the French did. And when they did it and they used one French word and left it with us, like difference, then everybody says, oh, Derrida, difference, and so on. Use a Malayalam word, use a Tamil word, produce, mutate it, modify it. But you have to be aware that description of your special experience needs also special language, not just regular language. It needs special input into us.
Hi, interesting talk. I have two questions for you. One is regarding experience and the language you just mentioned. So, we know that experience, we cannot reduce experience. It's not it's not reductible. Okay. So, then my question is given this fact, don't you think there is limitation to address experience, to communicate experience with language? Because it's inherently there will always be an explanatory gap which cannot be filled with language. Whatever words you choose, it's always it's a reductive endeavor, right? So you'll never be able to capture the entire experience with the new invention of language. So I want to know about that. Another thing is regarding an observation that you made regarding the ethics and the science. You said that now the science has departed from the ethics, and I want to know what do you think? What do you think about it? As in what caused that shift? From the beginning of the modern science, 200, 300 years ago. What changed?
Okay.
And
so very quick answer to that is for the first one, there is a tradition in philosophy, in this addresses this question. It's called the affability and ineffability thesis. The affability thesis is the argument that everything you experience can be verbalized, can be written in language. The ineffability thesis is the argument that there is always some component of experience, there is some type of experience which can never be converted into language. This is something which a lot of religious and spiritual traditions held on to. Ineffability. That is, there is something which you cannot express. That's why when you are in a position of, let's say, a spiritual experience, what people might call, you might perhaps sing. So we have to go back and ask, why is music so closely related to spiritual experience? Why is bhajan so important? Why are they singing all the time rather than just speaking? There is something about the type of language which cannot capture thing. There's a lot of limitations to our kind of language. But I don't think, okay, just to add for you to think, we can have a longer discussion. I think, we really don't know what our experiences are. Okay, I'm saying something really contrary to what we might believe. Any experience you have, you really don't know what it is until you articulate it. Suppose you say, oh, I'm feeling pain. Then that is your experience. For example, we were telling this, I saw one young woman was working in our house. She was, one day she came and said, my son is so angry. He's some 3 years or 4 years. I said, why are you using a term like anger? She was using a very adult term like anger. That kid was behaving in a particular way, and she categorized that behavior as anger. She's telling the child, don't be angry. And the child now begins to think anger means this. Right? So we actually use words to map our experiences. So if I give you a different terminology for it, you change the way you understand your experience. So cognitive therapy today in psychology is just that. Suppose you say, I'm depressed, and then you rewrite it by saying, I'm bored. There are two different meanings. Right? And the way you behave changes based on the way you categorize it. So I do think that affability is a very important thesis. I really don't know what kind of experience is outside that, But there are very important traditions to question that. And the second point, very quickly, since we have 50 seconds, it's there in the cracked mirror, but there is a paper of mine called Science and the Ethics of Curiosity, which you can download from the net, that gives a history of how science decouples morality from the production of modern science. It just tells a story of that.
So we have to wind up the session, and of course, this curiosity part is also a very important reference in Sundar's work, and also this whole like we could have discussed more the problem of translation and this experience, this authenticity and ownership. And about this language problem, well, I can tell you that it's in JNU, which isn't originally it was a kind of colonial product. I mean, English was the lingua franca, and gradually the English was replaced by not just Hindi, but the colloquial, I mean, the Awadhi and Bhojpuri and all. So, and I, as a Malayali who, I mean, neither English nor Hindi is my mother tongue, whenever I hear during the election somebody from Bihar speaking Bhojpuri, suddenly I feel, oh, this is very authentic. Now I have more terminology. It is ownership of experience. So then I add or enhance my conviction and my experience. Thank you all for be a part of this discussion.
Thank you.
Sundar.
Babu.